KALIN, ancient history has this reputation for being dry and dull. But what if I told you there's a historical text filled with assassins, supernatural strongmen, and political intrigue that makes House of Cards look tame?
Oh my goodness, Grana, you're talking about the Book of Judges, aren't you? This is arguably one of the most dramatic periods in ancient history.
Exactly right, Galen. We're examining a fascinating period following Joshua's death when Israel had no central authority, and these remarkable characters, known as judges, stepped up to save the day, although sometimes they caused as many problems as they solved.
You know, Grana, what's really interesting about this period, it follows this incredibly predictable pattern, almost like watching history on repeat.
Well, here's how it typically goes. The Israelites are doing well following their religious laws, but then they start getting comfortable and worship other gods, which leads to them being conquered by neighboring nations. After suffering for a while, they cry out for help, and boom, a judge appears to save the day.
And these judges were absolutely fascinating characters. Tell me about some of the most dramatic stories.
Oh man, where do I even start? Let's talk about Ehud, this left handed warrior who basically pulled off an ancient James Bond move. He had this special double edged sword made, hid it on his right thigh where guards wouldn't check, and assassinated an enemy king named Eglon in his private chamber.
That's some serious ancient espionage. And then there's Deborah. Talk about breaking the glass ceiling in ancient times.
Right? In a deeply patriarchal society, here's this woman who's not just a judge, but a military strategist and prophet. She's out there leading armies and making prophecies that change the course of battles. And get this, she's actually considered one of the most successful judges in the entire book.
Hmm. But my favorite has to be Gideon's story. The way he keeps asking for signs with that fleece and then what happens with his army is just incredible.
Oh, yeah, talk about counterintuitive military strategy. God keeps telling Gideon to reduce his army size from 32,000 down to just 300 men. And these 300 win by basically creating an ancient version of shock and awe with trumpets, torches, and clay jars that sent their enemies into such confusion they ended up fighting each other.
Speaking of incredible stories, we can't overlook Samson. He's basically the Superman of ancient Israel, right?
More like Superman with some serious personal issues. Here's a guy who could kill a lion with his bare hands and take out 1,000 enemies with a donkey's jawbone, but he just couldn't resist telling Delilah the secret of his strength, even after she'd already tried to betray him 3 times.
That's what makes these stories so compelling. These aren't perfect heroes, they're deeply flawed people who still manage to accomplish amazing things.
And sometimes those flaws lead to tragic consequences, like Jephthah, who makes this rash vow that if he wins in battle, he'll sacrifice the first thing that comes out of his house to greet him. Guess who comes dancing out to celebrate his victory?
His only daughter, you know, Grana, that story really shows how seriously they took vows back then, even when the consequences were devastating.
The book becomes progressively darker as it progresses, Kalen. By the end, we're dealing with civil war, tribal conflict, and this famous line about how everyone did what was right in their own eyes, basically describing complete social chaos.
That's such a powerful way to end the book. It really sets up why Israel eventually transitions to having kings.
Exactly, though that brings its own set of problems later. However, what's fascinating is how relevant these themes remain today. We're still grappling with questions about leadership, moral authority, and what happens when society loses its shared values.
And that cycle of crisis, redemption, complacency, and then crisis again, it feels pretty familiar.
Well, granted, folks, we've covered everything from assassinations to supernatural strength, from tragic vows to civil wars. The book of Judges really shows us that sometimes the most incredible stories aren't in fiction, they're right there in the historical record.
And perhaps, Kaylin, that's why these stories have endured for thousands of years. They convey something fundamental about human nature that remains true today.